Welcome to Norland Stories, where shadows talk and secrets walk. Tonight, a puzzle even Nero Wolfe can't ignore. Sharpen your wits. It's time to enter Wolfe's world. It was exactly 2:45 p.m. on a Tuesday, and in Nero Wolfe's brownstone, that means two things: silence thick enough to slice with a knife, and the smell of orchid fertilizer lingering like a threat. I was halfway through my second crossword. 7 across was annoying detective's assistant. 5 letters, and I was tempted to pencil in my own name. Wolfe was upstairs with his orchids, cultivating life the only way he approved of, from a distance and under glass. Downstairs, the office was asleep, except for the ticking of the big brass clock and the occasional creak of the radiator, which I swear sighs louder when it knows I'm bored. Then the doorbell rang. Not a buzz, not a knock, the bell. Wolfe hates the bell. I heard the familiar groan from upstairs. A man interrupted mid-thought, mid-mist is of rare dendrobiums. I got to the door first, which is policy. Our clients, if that's what this was, tend to show up looking guilty even when they swear they're innocent. She was wearing a coat that might have been older than she was, and boots that had seen too many winters. But the eyes, those were clear as glass and twice as sharp. "Mr. Wolfe?" she asked, voice soft like someone trying not to wake the past. I gave her my best winning smile. "You're lucky he hasn't thrown a shoe yet. Come in." She hesitated, as if stepping inside meant stepping into something worse. I get that a lot. I led her into the office. Wolfe arrived 6 minutes later, wearing his mustard yellow robe and the expression of a man who'd been forced to listen to inferior opinions all morning. "This," I said, "is Miss Calla Jensen, and she says she just spoke to her uncle. Is that extraordinary?" Wolfe grunted. "It is," she said quietly. "If your uncle died in 1962, and if you spoke to him last night in a town that no longer exists." I watched Wolfe's eyelids twitch, the way they do when a puzzle walks in dressed as nonsense. He didn't blink, just sat down heavily and steepled his fingers. "Miss Jensen," he said, voice like thunder behind velvet. "Start at the beginning, and do try not to waste my time." I closed the office door behind me. Whatever this was, it wasn't just the orchids that were about to get shaken. Miss Calla Jensen sat like a woman used to folding herself in corners, knees pressed, coat still, buttoned, fingers white-knuckled around the leather strap of her bag. She looked composed, polite, but her right shoe tapped the rug in Morse code, and her eyes scanned the room like it might disappear. Wolfe had already taken his seat, thrown, really, behind his desk, arms heavy on the rests. Pinky lightly twitching near the blotter. He disliked nervous energy almost as much as he disliked mystery. Yet he hadn't dismissed her. "Miss Jensen," he said, smoothing irritation into civility. "Explain what you mean by a town that no longer exists. Spare me the superstition. I want facts." She hesitated, adjusting her posture as though trying to become someone else. The town was called Greeley. It was in upstate New York. My mother was born there. But in 1962, the reservoir expansion submerged the whole valley. No buildings, no people. Nothing left but lake. Wolf grunted. She continued, more deliberate now. "Last week, I received a letter in my mailbox. No stamp, no postmark, just placed there. It was from my uncle, Richard Jensen." Archie Hirai watched Wolf's eyebrow perform a cautious lift. The man's brows are more expressive than most Broadway actors. He died in a fire the night Greeley was evacuated. She added, "That is a claim, not a fact," Wolf said dryly. "Continue." Kala unbuckled her bag and produced a thin, yellowed envelope. She handed it to me. The paper smelled faintly of mildew and chimney smoke hot because it was crisp and dry. Inside was a short handwritten note. I read aloud, "Kala, come to the Greeley post office. Midnight. Alone. You'll find answers. I need your help." Uncle Richard Wolf drummed his fingers now, a sure sign the irritation was being outweighed by interest. "You went?" he asked. She nodded, lowering her eyes. "I drove up that night. The road ends at the reservoir gate. But, I swear, the fog was so thick I must have missed the signs." Or she stopped. Her voice cracked like a branch underfoot. "Or what, Miss Jensen?" Wolf murmured. She looked up, eyes steady now, resolved. I reached the town. I walked its streets. There was no lake. The buildings were still there, dim lights. The post office still had the old brass boxes, and someone answered when I knocked. I think it was him, my uncle. Silence fell hard in the room. Even the radiator seemed to hold its breath. Wolf stared at her, unspeaking. I was watching her hands, still clenched, but not trembling. She was scared, sure, but she believed every word. "Why come to us?" Wolf finally asked. She met his gaze. "Because if I say this to anyone else, they'll ask me how many drinks I had, or what meds I forgot to take. But you, Mr. Wolf, you solve things other people dismiss." Wolf's jaw tightened. A tic I knew too well. Praise bothers him more than insult. He prefers fear or fee. "I don't solve dreams or chase phantoms," he said, but the tone had shifted, less dismissive, more calculating. "What do you want from us?" I asked. Cutting through the fog, Kala hesitated. Find out if I'm crazy, she said at last. Or if something impossible is trying to reach me. Her voice cracked again just once. Wolf inhaled like he was about to shut the whole thing down. But then he caught something in her expression, sliver of calculation beneath the fear. A layer she hadn't meant to show. He muttered. Very well. Mr. Goodwin will accompany you to this. Greeley, she blinked. It's not on any maps anymore. I have other means, Wolf said, waving her off. She stood, thanked us softly, and left. When the door clicked shut, Wolf turned to me. You'll take the road to madness and see if it intersects with deceit. I grabbed my coat. What am I looking for? Contradiction, he said. Wherever reality seems to fold, there is a hand doing the folding. If you've ever tried to find a town that officially drowned in 1962, here's a tip. Don't start with Google. Start with librarians, liquor store clerks, and people who remember which roads got buried underwater. Wolf had me on a train to Albany before the ink on Miss Jensen's story had dried. I rented a car and started sniffing around the forgotten edges of the Catskills, where reservoirs run deep. And memories even deeper. The town of Greeley didn't show up on maps, but Greeley Lake did. And with enough locals muttering about old ghosts and dry summers, I eventually found the detour. A muddy service road marked no trespassing in rusted red. It led me to the real suspects, the ones living in the ghost of a town that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. First up, I found a cabin with a roof like a broken spine and a porch full of antlers. Elliot Wade answered the door with a shotgun in one hand and a cigarette burning low in the other. 60-something, boots caked in lake mud, eyes too clear to be harmless. I don't talk to tourists, he growled. Good thing I'm not one, I said. I'm looking for a man named Richard Jensen. He froze, flicked ash onto his boot. Jensen's dead, he said. All of Mr. Iskala Jensen disagrees. So do I. He eyed me for a beat, then opened the screen door. You got 5 minutes. After that, I remember the shotgun. Inside, the cabin was a museum of Greeley's past. Photos, named, scratched into window frames. One photo had Richard Jensen's name in faded pencil. Elliot didn't say a word, but his jaw was tight enough to crack teeth. Next, I drove 3 miles down a wooded path to a trailer parked beside what used to be Greeley's schoolhouse. The woman inside looked like she was forged from caffeine and fury. I'm not an archivist. She barked before I said anything. I'm just the one who didn't leave. Marlene Croft, age 52, former postmaster's daughter. She remembered the evacuation orders. She also remembered who stayed behind and swore Richard Jensen wasn't one of them. People say they saw him last year. I told her, they also say the town sings at night, she snapped. Ghost stories keep the outsiders out. That's the only reason this place hasn't turned into a damn hiking trail. She handed me a yellowed journal, supposedly written by Richard Jensen. The last page, dated August 2025. Back in town, or what was left of it, I found a church still standing like it owed God rent. Inside was a man in a black shirt polishing a candelabrum, like it was sacred. Pastor Halliday smiled the way preachers smile at funerals, polite, unreadable, firm. We were told to leave, he said, but the Lord doesn't abandon his house. I asked him about Richard Jensen. He lowered the candelabrum and set it gently on the altar. Richard was troubled. He believed something was coming for us. He said Greeley wasn't dead, just buried, said it would rise again, and maybe it has. I asked if he'd seen him recently. I've heard his voice, the pastor said, in dreams, in fog. Sometimes, when it rains, I hear him at the door. He didn't laugh, neither did I last suspect. Kenny Voss, local patrol officer assigned to the reservoir. Buzzcott aviators, uniform too crisp to be sincere. He found me photographing the edge of the lake and asked if I was lost. I gave him Wolf's card. He whistled, private eyes. For what? A ghost town. More like a ghost uncle, I said. He didn't like that. Not even a little. Whatever people think they see here, he said. Leaning close, they shouldn't. This whole place was shut down for a reason. The state doesn't want anyone digging around. Digging for what? I asked. He smiled, the cold kind. Answers. History. Same thing, same thing. By the time I called Wolf that night, I had 4 suspects, 1 forged diary, a fog-shrouded road that shouldn't exist, and more contradictions than a politician's biography. Send the journal by express, Wolf ordered. What do you make of it? I asked. He paused. Nothing yet. But Miss Jensen lied. Twice. I blinked. You sure? I always am, he said, and hung up. There's nothing quite like a body to ruin your day, especially one that shouldn't exist, especially when it shows up dead twice. I was halfway back to the motel outside Catskill when my phone buzzed. The caller ID'd just said, Marlene. Her voice was tight. You'd better come quick. It's Wade. He's dead. I got there in 20 minutes. Marlene stood on the back porch, arms folded, jaw clenched. She didn't lead me inside. She just pointed. Behind the trailer, Elliot Wade was sprawled on the ground like someone had dropped him from a height. Mud up his back. Shirt torn, neck broken badly, like it had been twisted, not snapped. And here's the kicker. On his chest was a photograph weighed down with a smooth stone. The picture was decades old, black and white, cracked at the corners. 4 people in the shot. 3 I recognized from old town photos. The 4th, Richard Jensen, standing in the center, smiling like he never left. I bent down and flipped the photo over. There was handwriting on the back. 3 words in faded ink. Wolf picked up on the first ring. Unusual for him. I told him about Wade. The photo, the way he looked like he'd seen something before he died. There was a long pause. I could hear him chewing something, probably liver peaty, with a smirk. This improves matters, Wolf said calmly. Improves. A man who shouldn't be alive is now dead. That's twice the contradiction, twice the pressure. And I do thrive on pressure, Archie. Try telling that to the guy with the snapped neck. Do hurry. I dislike murder without context. T hung up again. The sheriff showed up late, half curious, half irritated. A man named Forley, small town badge, big state, paranoia. Didn't like my questions. Liked my city shoes even less. You poking around Wade's place? He asked. I was asking about a man named Jensen. You and every crackpot ghost hunter in the last 10 years. But Wade was clean. Stayed out of sight. He leaned closer. You want to poke around Greeley, Mr. Goodwin. That's fine. Just make sure you don't end up under it. Nice guy. I locked the door and spread everything out on the bed. The journal, pages. The photo, a map of the original Greeley grid. The dots didn't connect. They swam like something under the surface was shifting. I couldn't sleep because Wade's face, frozen like that, wasn't just fear. It was recognition. He'd seen something. Maybe someone. Maybe Richard Jensen himself, dead in 1962. And maybe again tonight. I flew back early. Wolf was in his chair, orchids freshly misted. He didn't even look up as I walked in, coat still, damp from the rain. You've been in a graveyard, he said, close. How'd you know? You smell like mildew and guilt. Sit down. I did. He opened a folder on his lap. Our boy, Jensen, front and center, in clothes that looked too modern for the 1960s. The shadow under his collar. Wolf pointed, too sharp. That photograph was doctored and poorly. I leaned forward. So what? Jensen's still alive. Perhaps, but more likely, someone wants it to look that way. He tapped the folder, closed, and someone else just died to keep it that way. The stakes weren't just rising, they were catching fire. And Wolf, he wasn't just intrigued anymore, he was hungry. And that always meant trouble for someone. Wolf hated three things more than warm beer: ghost stories, long trips, cases where people lied badly, so naturally. We had all three by Wednesday morning. He was already in Midrand when I walked in, waving his hand like he was shooing away the very concept of nonsense. A town that died, Archie, and now resurrected by whispering idiots and forged photographs. Fa. I dropped the folder onto his desk. That whispering idiot got his neck twisted like a wet towel. Remember? Wade's dead. Precisely. And may he rest. That should conclude our involvement. I folded my arms. You were the one who said it improves matters. 2 days ago, you were practically humming. I was provoked by novelty. I am now revolted by incoherence. Do you know how many hours this has already cost me? 4, I said. Which is also how many sherry bottles you've been through since Tuesday. He didn't laugh. Someone wishes to convince us of an impossibility, that a dead man walks and murders. That is not merely vulgar, it is insolent. Picked up the photograph again, scowled, and tossed it onto the desk like it smelled bad. The symbolism is infantile. I grinned, and yet you made me fly upstate, dodge a lunatic sheriff, and sleep on a mattress that might, all because you were provoked by novelty. He didn't reply, just stared at me, cold, silent, so I pressed. I think the town is fake, I said. The modern one. Something's being hidden in Greeley, or under it. Wolf snorted. You have a weakness for the subterranean. Only when the corpses start piling up. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and muttered, This is the kind of tale I'd expect from a bedraggled lunatic on 14th Street, not from a detective agency of some repute. Then drop the repute and keep the case. That got him, Archie. Do you understand how rare it is for me to want to quit a case? I do, which is why I'm ignoring it. That was the game. He'd threatened to storm off into his orchids, into his routine, into his fussy little cocoon. And I'd poke the bear just enough to keep the claws out, because Wolf never really wanted to quit. He just needed a reason to get mad at something that wasn't the truth. And right now, the truth was ugly, which meant we were close, too close for comfort. Most of my job is chasing shadows. That turn out to be laundry lines. But every now and then, a shadow moves, and that's when you call Wolf. This time, it was a photograph, a Polaroid. To be exact, faded, folded, and jammed behind a drawer in the sheriff's desk in Greeley's now abandoned station. I laid it flat on Wolf's blotter. He barely glanced at it. Another relic from a town that shouldn't exist. What am I meant to admire? The composition. I pointed. Bottom left. The boy with a slingshot, and the man behind him. He leaned forward, just slightly, His brow lifted. The man, that's the client's uncle. And the boy, I said, is Wade Heller, the one who died last week. He didn't reply. So I twisted the knife. That photo's stamped July 12th, 1984. Wade would have been 38 by then. Wolf's nostrils flared, which means he shouldn't be that boy. Not in 1984. Not in any rational world. And just like that, click, Wolf was in. His disgust melted into suspicion. His suspicion into calculation. And his calculation. That's when things get dangerous. Someone is manufacturing time. Photo pinched between two fingers like contaminated evidence. Archie, I need all the names of those listed in the Greeley census pre-1962. Cross them with property sales in the last 20 years. That'll take hours. Then begin. Every hour now is a waste we cannot afford. That photo changed everything. A man who died last week, appearing as a 10-year-old. 20 years after the town was wiped off the map, either someone was falsifying decades of evidence, or the dead town was a lie from the start. Either way, the web was tightening, and we were no longer on the outside. The problem with ghosts isn't that they haunt you. It's that they lie, especially the ones still breathing. So I paid a visit to Emily Hartwell, the assistant librarian, who claimed she never lived in Greeley. Problem is, Wolf had found her name on a 1961 PTA newsletter. Right under Punch and Cookies. Emily sat across from me, hands tight in her lap, twitching like a rabbit in an open field. I laid the newsletter on the table, slid it toward her. You lied. She stared at it, then at me. I didn't mean to. I leaned forward. You were in Greeley, Emily, the year it vanished. So why deny it? Her voice came out like a torn page. Because we made a deal. Pause. They said no one would get hurt if we never spoke again. I stayed quiet. That's how you let the silence work. She looked up, eyes glassy, scared. It wasn't an accident. The town, ... It didn't die. It was erased. I didn't get a confession, but I got something better. Raw fear. She knew more, a lot more. And whatever Greeley had been, it hadn't just faded into memory. It had been buried on purpose, and the shovels were still out there by Wednesday. I learned 3 things about Dr. Kel Morrigan, the charming historian with the steel blue eyes. He drank his bourbon neat. He kept every town ledger like scripture, and he'd never once mentioned he was born in Greeley. Wolf found it on a property deed. His signature, age 10, scribbled on a donation to the Greeley Historical Society. Address, 14 Juniper Street, Greeley, Illinois. Population 0. Since 1962, Wolf lifted a brow. Mr. Morrigan. It is the custom in civilized societies to disclose when one is a corpse by census record. Cal stiffened. It was a long time ago. I pressed. You said you were from Evanston. Legally, I am. He stood suddenly, voice cracking like old plaster. You don't understand. We weren't supposed to leave. They warned us. He paced now, sweating. I changed my name. Cal Morrigan isn't mine. They told us, if anyone asks, say you were born elsewhere. Forget Greeley. Because if they find out you remember, they'll come back. Investigation anymore. It felt like we were knocking on the door of something that had been locked tight for over 60 years, and something on the other side had just turned the knob. A dead town, a fake identity, and a man terrified not of being caught, but of being noticed. The masks weren't just falling, they were rotting. I once saw a man in Jersey light a match and blow up his garage, not on purpose. But the second boom always hits harder than the first. That's how it felt when Amanda Kerr vanished. She wasn't just a suspect. She was our lifeline to whatever the hell Greeley had been hiding. And now, she was gone. Left her car running outside her motel room, door wide open, purse on the bed. TV still blaring, static. Inspector Kramer looked like someone had swapped his cigar for a stick of dynamite. First, the historian ends up in a psych ward. Girl disappears. Wolf, if you're hiding something, now is not the time for your circus act. Wolf, in that chair of his, unmoved. If Miss Kerr is dead, Inspector, then your officers have, yet again, provided fine cover for a killer. Damn it, Wolf language, Inspector. Wolf pinched the bridge of his nose. That's when I knew he was rattled. This town, he said, almost to himself, ceased to exist in 1962, yet its ghosts are haunting us in chronological order. I was on my second cup of coffee, phone calls out to county morgues and bus stations. Nothing. Amanda Kerr hadn't checked out. She'd simply been subtracted. There are moments when a case stops being clever and starts being cold. This was one of them. Because if Amanda was next, who was after her? And why did every road lead back to a town that no longer had roads? The thing about Wolf, he doesn't shout Eureka. He just leans back, lifts a brow, and lets the room spin while he sips beer. Like a Roman emperor. And that's exactly what he did when I casually mentioned the church bulletin. I was pacing. Wolf was lounging. Fritz had brought in sandwiches. No one touched them. You said Miss Kerr picked it up from the motel lobby. Wolf asked. Yeah, a whole stack. Looked freshly printed. He didn't nod, but his eyes did something. Narrowed like he was staring into 1962 through a microscope. Mr. Goodwin, he said softly, who exactly is printing church bulletins for a congregation that died 6 decades ago? Boom. It was a throwaway detail. Motel pamphlets, local. Garbage. But it wasn't local. Not anymore. Somebody was updating that bulletin weekly with fake prayer requests, made up bake sales, and a pastor who'd been buried since JFK. The answer is in the margins, Wolf said, meaning whoever maintains the illusion of that town ... must be its gatekeeper, and perhaps its executioner. I swear, he smiled, just the corner of his mouth, and I knew then the bastard had cracked it. That bulletin wasn't a church record. It was a signal, and someone alive, dangerous, and very much nearby had just revealed they were still playing God. In a ghost town, there are few things in life more consistent than Nero Wolfe's dinner schedule. Orchids at 9, and Inspector Kramer barging in when he's dead wrong. This was one of those nights, complete with cigar smoke, handcuffs, and premature victory. Kramer storms in. A trembling woman in cuffs behind them. We've got her, Wolf. Case closed. Wolf didn't even look up from his beer, indeed. And which case would that be, Inspector? Don't play coy. The Kerr woman, she's been living under a false name. Real name's Dorothy Allen. Vanished in '83 after her fiancé was murdered. We ran the prints. She was hiding in that town. It's motive enough. Wolf sipped, paused, and then calmly wiped his mouth. So you've arrested her for surviving. Kramer's jaw clenched like he'd swallowed a tack, and Wolf wasn't done. You believe she murdered a man who, according to county death records, died in 1962. The death records are forged. Are they? Wolf leaned forward now. Because the man in question signed a property deed last week. We obtained it from the registrar's office this afternoon. Dead men, it turns out, make clumsy forgers. You let your enthusiasm outpace your evidence. Inspector, Wolf said, folding his hands. A common affliction, perhaps contagious. Damn it, Wolf, language. We are in the presence of orchids and innocence. Kramer left without a word. Dorothy Allen, or Kerr, sat shaking quietly on the couch, and Wolf, that smug lump of brain power, finally turned serious. Mr. Goodwin, he said, someone is constructing a fiction. So elaborate, it requires a town of corpses and a ledger of ghosts. I didn't like the sound of that dot, because when Wolf starts using words like constructing, Someone's about to get demolished when Wolf tells me to leave the house after midnight. It's not for a walk in the moonlight. It means someone's about to regret underestimating a 700-pound mind with a lazy streak. Wolf wanted a birth certificate. The original, not the copy someone slipped into the file last week. The real one. Deep in a dust-caked box marked Delmar, 1937 to 1965. Why would anyone forge a dead man's papers unless he wasn't supposed to be dead? I pried open the metal drawer. There it was, Franklin M. Delmar, born March 9th, 1938, died blank. No death certificate. But there was something else wedged behind the folder, folded small, smudged with ash. One that made my spine twitch. Vault 47 was in a storage facility 20 miles from that ghost town, still paid for under a dead man's name. I drove like hell. The lock was old school. The contents weren't. Inside the metal vault sat a leather-bound ledger, stamped with the Delmar family crest, and filled with cash transfers, falsified death reports, fake IDs, and something Wolf would describe as incendiary, a list of names. Every one of them presumed dead in 1962. Everyone with matching bank withdrawals in the last year, encircled in red ink, with a note scrawled next to it. That ledger was more than proof. It was a kill order, and it meant whoever killed to keep. 1962 buried. We're still watching the grave. I headed back to the brownstone, and I wasn't alone. The truth had a body count, but Wolf now had his proof. Wolf's office, 11:03 a.m. You could have charged the atmosphere rent. The tension was that thick. 5 people sat beneath the orchid mural, trying not to squirm. Dorothy Allen, pale and silent. Martin Rusk, arms crossed, sweat beading. Sheriff Arlen Pike, stone-faced, behind mirrored glasses. Lucinda Delmar, expression unreadable. And Kramer, chewing an unlit cigar, like it owed him answers. I stood near the door, just in case someone tried to bolt. Wolf didn't rise. He didn't need to. Ladies, gentlemen, we will now discuss a murder. 2, to be precise. One committed in 1962, and another quite recently. They flinched. Wolf noticed. Miss Allen's father, Franklin Delmar, was not killed in the factory fire as the town believed. He orchestrated it and staged the deaths of dozens with the help of a certain official. He turned his gaze, slow, deliberate, toward the sheriff. Pike didn't blink, but his right thumb tapped his knee. Hard. Those names were relocated, hidden in plain sight, reborn with new identities. Why? Because Delmar was laundering wartime chemical patents through ghost companies, and the fire erased the trail. Until Dorothy Allen came looking for her father and got too close. The room went still. Wolf lifted a slip of paper with 2 fingers, the ledger receipt. Your plan unraveled, Mr. Rusk, the moment Miss Allen walked into that town and someone answered her knock. That doesn't prove you rented Vault 47. Your fingerprints are on the ledger. And you paid Pike to insure. Silence. He paused. Unfortunately, the second death, that of Joseph Hanley, the last surviving mill worker, was sloppy. You killed a man already dying of lung fibrosis. That was impatience, not strategy. Pike reached for his badge. Kramer beat him to it. Don't bother, Sheriff. A trivial detail, gentlemen, a missing death certificate, revealed everything. Never underestimate paperwork. Lucinda Del Mar burst into tears. Dorothy. She just stared ahead. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. It just breaks. The silence. Wolf leaned back in his chair and reached for a beer. Another ghost laid to rest. Another killer unmasked.